He was the heavyweight champion of the world.
Heavyweight champion of the world, Floyd Patterson. Floyd.
Sneaking out of arenas in a fake beard like a man on the run, not because he was scared of a fight, but because losing crushed him so bad he couldn't bear to be seen. And here's the wild part. This wasn't some no-name contender. This was Floyd Patterson, the youngest champion in heavyweight history. But why? How did a record-breaking icon become a symbol of shame? And why do we remember his knockouts more than his legacy? Let's break it all down.
Some of the writers are saying that you're not ready for more. What do you think of that?
Well, my manager thinks I am. If he does, I do too.
When fans argue about the greatest heavyweights of all time, it's always the same names at the top. Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, Joe Louis, legends, no doubt. But lurking in the shadows of these giants is a name that history doesn't say loud enough. Floyd Patterson, a man who shattered records before some of those legends even laced up gloves. You want to talk about making history? Floyd Patterson wrote it, yet somehow, some fans struggle to even remember his name.
Floyd Patterson is the fastest thing on 2 feet.
On November 30th, 1956, Patterson didn't just win a fight. He carved his name into boxing lore.
Shot. Archie doesn't know where he is. Floor is up, but he's shaking. Here's Patterson.
At just 21 years, 10 months, 3 weeks, and 5 days old, he knocked out the legendary Archie Moore and became the youngest heavyweight champion the sport had ever seen. While most guys his age were barely holding down a job or finishing college, Floyd was sitting on the throne of boxing's most dangerous division. And he wasn't done. For a man who made history that young, the pressure was only beginning to mount. And it would soon crush him in ways no one saw coming. After losing his title to Ingemar Johansson, Patterson faced what was considered a death sentence for a champion. Back then, losing the heavyweight crown wasn't just a setback, it was the end. No one had ever come back to reclaim it until Patterson. On June 20th, 1960, he knocked Johansson out cold in the rematch and became the first man in boxing history to regain the undisputed heavyweight title. The guts it took to come back from that kind of humiliation? That says more about Patterson than any belt ever could. And make no mistake, this wasn't some overnight prodigy story. Patterson climbed the ranks the hard way. He took tough fights coming up, including an early loss to former light heavyweight champ Joey Maxim. But instead of folding, Patterson doubled down. By 1956, the ring had him ranked as the top light heavyweight in the world, before he even moved up to take over the heavyweights. But here's what really made Patterson special: the way he fought.
I was sure, having made a stud of Archie Moore, the extraordinary turtle-like defense, which involved this. His arm would be across his body, and his other arm across his jaw. And he would watch. His arm back, the strike. That will leave the punch, this jaw exposed. If you're close enough, the moment he does this to hit, you hit him, and automatically his left hand will go back to cover.
In an era where most heavyweights looked like they were dragging concrete, Patterson moved like a welterweight. His combos, fluid, fast, damn near poetic. While others loaded up one big punch, Patterson threw blinding flurries that overwhelmed his opponents. So here's the million-dollar question. Why don't we mention Patterson in the same breath as Ali, Tyson, or Louis? Why has one of boxing's most groundbreaking champions become a historical afterthought? Maybe it's because Floyd wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He didn't scream for attention or start drama in press conferences. He was soft-spoken, reflective, complicated. And in a sport that worships alpha energy, that made him invisible. Or maybe, just maybe, it's because we let his worst moments define him. We remember the brutal knockouts from Sonny Liston, the humiliating loss to Muhammad Ali.
A left, a grazing right, and a solid left to the cheekbone. Drop the champion.
But we forget the kid who became champ at 21. We forget the man who did the impossible and reclaimed his title. In our obsession with spectacle, we've erased the substance. We've forgotten just how revolutionary Patterson truly was. Behind the lightning-fast combinations that made him a champion stood a young man who once couldn't look people in the eye. Most fans saw the guy who conquered Olympic gold and the heavyweight crown. But what they didn't see was the Brooklyn Reform School kid who'd been dismissed as nothing more than a troubled delinquent with learning difficulties. That version of Floyd Patterson tells you way more about his character than any championship belt ever could. Born in 1935 in Waco, North Carolina, Patterson was one of 11 siblings, raised in the kind of poverty most people only read about. When the family moved to Brooklyn's Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood, they didn't escape the struggle. They just swapped rural hardship for urban chaos. Floyd didn't fit in, not at school, not in the streets. He couldn't read well, couldn't focus, and felt completely worthless. And those weren't other people's words. That's how he described himself: stupid and powerless. These literacy struggles formed the foundation of a deep-seated insecurity that pushed him toward truancy and petty theft. While other kids were figuring out multiplication tables, Patterson was learning to survive on Brooklyn's unforgiving streets. He was already slipping through the cracks. Then came the turning point. At just 10 years old, Floyd was sent to the Wiltwick School for Boys, a reform school. For most kids, that's the beginning of the end. But for Patterson, it became what he later called a blessing. At Wiltwick, for the first time in his life, he found structure. And that structure gave him space to breathe, to grow. The kid who once felt invisible started to feel seen. And when he returned to Brooklyn 2 years later, something was different. At 14, he walked into the Bedford-Stuyvesant Boxing Association gym. That gym didn't just change his life, it gave him a brand new one. Between those ropes, the shy kid who struggled to make eye contact found a language he could speak fluently, the language of fists, footwork, and heart. This is where Cus D'Amato enters the story. D'Amato didn't just train Floyd, he shaped him. He became the father figure he never had. He didn't care that he was quiet or unsure or damaged. He saw something else, a diamond in the rough, buried under years of self-doubt. With D'Amato, Patterson absorbed a worldview that valued discipline and perseverance above natural talent. Boxing is a contest of character as much as it is of fists, D'Amato would say. And that wasn't just a mantra, it was a blueprint. Under him, Floyd mastered the peekaboo style, hands high, elbows tight, eyes laser-focused. It was a style built to protect the smaller man, and Patterson made it sing. Quick combos, elusive angles, speed over size. Against slower opponents, it made him look untouchable. But even this beautiful system had its flaws. Because once the giants came, the same defense that made him great started to collapse. What D'Amato did for Patterson went way beyond head movement and footwork. He didn't just train a boxer, he carefully rebuilt a broken boy. He saw a kid haunted by self-doubt, and instead of toughening him up the old-school way, he crafted a style and a mindset tailored to protect him. D'Amato understood that Patterson didn't just need technique, he needed belief, and brick by brick, they built it. That belief carried Patterson all the way to the 1952 Helsinki Olympics, where he captured gold in the middleweight division. Let's see. Reform school at 10, Olympic podium by 17. That's not just talent, that's transformation. When he turned pro, he brought everything with him: speed, style, and a quiet kind of fury. He wasn't the loudest fighter, he wasn't the scariest, but his quick combinations and distinctive style made him formidable even as he carried his insecurities into every fight. Each victory was another brick in the foundation of his hard-won self-confidence. But here's the thing about fragile confidence. It only takes one crack to bring the whole thing down. And Patterson was about to meet opponents who didn't just want his title, they wanted to destroy him. The boxing world was about to witness something they rarely see: a champion who felt the shame of defeat more deeply than the glory of victory. June 26, 1959, Floyd Patterson versus Ingemar Johansson. A solid challenger, but no one expected what came next. The champion entered the ring confident but cautious. What followed became boxing nightmare. The moment the bell rang, Johansson unleashed pure chaos. He sent Patterson crashing to the canvas 7 times in the 3rd round. 7.
Pointed right to the head, and the champion is down.
And Patterson kept getting up, wobbling, dazed, fighting on instinct, until referee Ruby Goldstein had seen enough. What started as a title defense ended as a public execution. Overnight, public perception shifted from seeing Patterson as unbeatable to viewing him as fundamentally flawed. This defeat etched itself into boxing lore, the kind that transforms a champion into a question mark. Johansson became Sweden's hero and the first European to defeat an American for the heavyweight title since 1933. Patterson, meanwhile, became something worse, a champion exposed, and here's where most fighters would have vanished. But Patterson didn't. He came back, and in the rematch, he knocked Johansson out cold. First man in history to ever reclaim the heavyweight crown. It should have rewritten his legacy, but it didn't. What should have been the perfect redemption arc was only a fleeting moment, because in the eyes of the public, the 7 knockdowns stuck harder than the comeback knockout. But if you thought getting knocked down 7 times was the worst Floyd would endure, you haven't seen anything yet. Because the next name on his fight card? Sonny Liston. And Liston wasn't just a threat, he was a nightmare in gloves.
A left, a grazing right, and a solid left to the cheekbone dropped the champion.
Their 1962 encounter lasted just 1 round. Liston's enormous fists pummeled Patterson's body before 2 left hooks to the head ended the night, delivering the 3rd fastest knockout in heavyweight championship history. The public now questioned whether Patterson had ever belonged among boxing's elite, and if anyone thought it was a fluke, well, the rematch in July 1963 erased that fantasy real quick. 1 round, again, same ring, same result, same devastation. The contrast was stark. Patterson's slick footwork, his peekaboo defense, all the things that once made him special, meant absolutely nothing against Liston's raw, punishing power. But Patterson's most unforgettable move didn't come inside the ring. It came afterward, because after that first Liston loss, Floyd Patterson didn't just leave the arena. He escaped it, wearing dark glasses and a fake beard, so ashamed he couldn't bear to be seen. The former heavyweight champion of the world was in disguise, like a criminal, like someone on the run. Not from the law, but from the shame in the eyes of the public. From the reality that maybe he wasn't who he thought he was. That's not just defeat, that's emotional annihilation. And then came Muhammad Ali. If Liston broke Patterson's body, Ali came for his soul.
The only man that would have a chance of beating me is Floyd Patterson. Who could you name better than Floyd Patterson? How faster?
Before they even touched gloves in 1965, Ali was already toying with him, mocking him, calling him an Uncle Tom for refusing to acknowledge his Muslim name. And Patterson? He walked into that fight believing it was a moral crusade, that he was fighting for something bigger than boxing. But Ali had other plans. For 12 rounds, he carried Patterson. Didn't knock him out, just punished him. Slowly, deliberately, like a cat playing with a mouse. One New York Times writer called it, like watching someone pull the wings off a butterfly.
In fact, the big surprise came early. Early for the fans in the stands because Patterson picked up a point lead in round number 1.
Patterson, limited by a ruptured sacroiliac joint, stood no chance. Their 1972 rematch ended similarly when doctors examined Patterson's damaged eye.
Just a massive blood. The round is almost over. Round 7.
These losses revealed Patterson's fundamental tragedy. The physical disadvantages were clear. Typically weighing around 185 pounds with a short reach against much larger men. His body might have been outmatched in the ring, but the most disturbing mismatch? The one happening inside his own mind. He wasn't wired like other champions. He didn't mask pain with bravado. He didn't walk off losses like they didn't matter. Floyd Patterson felt every defeat deeply, so deeply that after Liston, he literally became someone else. A man in a fake beard, trying to hide from a world that had just watched him fall. For champions of Patterson's era, identity was inextricably woven with victory. The disguise represented more than avoidance. It was a mask of fragility. A last-ditch effort to separate himself from the shattered version of who he thought he was. Patterson flees in disguise, the headline screamed. And the world didn't forget. Most fighters after a loss might duck questions or hurry to their dressing room. Patterson invented an entirely new person, an entirely new identity, just to survive the shame. And that says more than any knockout ever could. The boxing world of the 1950s and 60s had one golden rule. You took your punishment like a man. You didn't cry, you didn't hide. Champions were expected to be stoic, unshakable. But Floyd Patterson? He couldn't and wouldn't play that part. In a sport that celebrated machismo and brute force, Patterson dared to be sensitive. While the media portrayed Sonny Liston as a menacing villain, Patterson was openly expressing his fears and insecurities. This made him relatable to everyday people, but suspect among boxing purists who expected their champions to be invincible. Still, Patterson knew himself better than most fighters ever did. "It's easy to do anything in victory," he once said. "It's in defeat that a man reveals himself." This line tells us everything about his psychology. He knew his reactions to losing revealed more about his character than his victories ever could. And then there's his relationship with boxing itself, one of the most brutally honest takes you'll ever hear. In his own words, it's like being in love with a woman. She can be unfaithful, she can be mean, she can be cruel, but it doesn't matter. If you love her, you want her, even though she can do you all kinds of harm. It's the same with me in boxing. That wasn't just poetic, it was tragic. Because Floyd Patterson was in love with a sport that didn't always love him back. Even as boxing broke him down over and over again, he kept coming back. Because to him, boxing wasn't just a job, it was who he was, and that fragility, the kind you saw when he disguised himself after defeat. That wasn't some one-off reaction. That was deep-rooted trauma born long before he ever stepped into a ring. The fake beards, the dark glasses, they were just grown-up versions of a scared kid trying to hide from a world that made him feel small. Behind every championship story lurks the architect, the trainer who molds raw talent into something legendary. For Floyd Patterson, that architect was Cus D'Amato. But here's the twist. What if the very system D'Amato built to protect Patterson was the same one that set him up to fail? See, D'Amato wasn't just a trainer. He was a strategist, a full-blown mastermind. He orchestrated everything, the training, the matchmaking, the image. And at the center of it all was one brilliant design, the peekaboo style.
Watch Patterson's old familiar peekaboo style implanted in him by Cus D'Amato. The hands up in front of the face, the elbows reasonably close together.
There was a time when Floyd was as punishing a puncher.
The style made him elusive. He could slip punches, fire back with lightning-fast counters, and use his speed to control the tempo. Against the right opponents, Patterson appeared unbeatable, like he was playing chess while everyone else was swinging hammers. D'Amato built Patterson into a technical boxer rather than a brawler. He emphasized skill, speed, and agility, creating a thinking fighter who could outmaneuver opponents through superior technique, and for a while it worked like a charm. Patterson won the title, defended it, became the youngest heavyweight champ ever. History was made. We went over that, but here's the problem with systems like that. They only work until they don't. Because boxing isn't just about what you do well, it's about how you survive when things go wrong. And when Floyd Patterson finally faced Sonny Liston, a man with sledgehammers for fists, that beautifully engineered peekaboo defense became a death trap. Liston didn't play chess, he played demolition. He blasted through Patterson's shell like it wasn't even there. And the collapse wasn't just physical, it was systemic. As sports writer Jimmy Cannon put it, Patterson looked like a man falling from a building. And here's where things get even messier. That fight? It should have happened years earlier, but it didn't, because D'Amato wouldn't allow it. Patterson's complete system collapse against Liston exposed the direct result of D'Amato's protective matchmaking. He was paranoid about the boxing establishment, particularly those with alleged mob connections. He didn't trust the system, so he kept Patterson away from its most dangerous pieces. And that meant cherry-picked opponents during his championship reign, safe fights, manageable threats. By shielding him from fighters with certain styles, D'Amato prevented Patterson from building the adaptability that separates good champions from great ones. He never faced the pressure cookers, never developed the mental reps you get from fighting real monsters. So when the monster finally came, there was no plan B. Liston was everything Patterson had been protected from. And in one round, the entire D'Amato system unraveled. Now compare that to his next prodigy, Mike Tyson. Same peekaboo stance, same movement. But with Tyson, D'Amato didn't build a technician. He built a wrecking ball, a fighter who could take hits, walk through pain, and dish out punishment like a machine. Tyson was molded for war. Patterson was molded for perfection. And that may have been the difference. Let's be clear. Patterson himself wasn't lacking courage or determination. What he lacked was exposure to the brutal realities of fighting against overwhelming force. He never had to sharpen the one thing that matters most in boxing: resilience under fire. The bitter irony is this: Cus D'Amato made Floyd Patterson a champion, but he might have also made it impossible for him to stay one. Could Patterson have been greater with different guidance? It's the question that haunts his legacy. We remember Patterson for how he fell, but what about how he stood back up? Outside the ropes, Patterson faced something far more dangerous than any heavyweight punch: America in the middle of a civil rights war. The boxing world has always been quick to dismiss Floyd Patterson. Too small, too gentle, too easily beaten, a champion who didn't belong. But that's the thing, this obsession with Patterson's knockouts, it completely misses the true measure of the man. This was someone who quietly changed boxing history while fighting battles far more significant than any he faced in the ring. In 1957, Patterson toured the segregated South on an exhibition circuit. In Fort Smith, Arkansas, he faced a hostile crowd waving Confederate flags and screaming racial slurs. But something clicked that night. When a local priest stepped in to help calm the chaos, Patterson found his voice. From that point on, he made it clear: if a venue was segregated, he wouldn't fight there. That wasn't just bold, that was radical. And it came with consequences, severe and immediate ones. As a black champion using his platform, Patterson risked his career and personal safety when many others remained silent. He even faced down death threats when he stood with Dr. Martin Luther King. Patterson didn't just put his reputation on the line, he put his life on the line. He needed police escorts. Anonymous callers promised violence if he showed his face, but he walked straight into the fire anyway. How do you measure that kind of courage? And unlike some of his contemporaries, Patterson wasn't afraid to take a controversial stance. Even against someone as iconic as Muhammad Ali, he publicly criticized Ali's association with the Nation of Islam, not out of malice, but because he genuinely believed in integration over separation. He became a voice for the marginalized when speaking out could end careers, or worse. That same courage showed up in the ring, too. Let's not forget, Patterson was undersized. He fought at around 185 pounds with a 71-inch reach. He was basically a middleweight thrown into the shark tank of rising heavyweights, yet he never backed down. He faced Sonny Liston twice when every logical voice in the sport was telling him not to. He could have moved down in weight. He could have walked away. Instead, Patterson chose the harder path, facing the most intimidating punchers of his generation despite the obvious dangers. And he carried himself with a level of sportsmanship that feels almost alien in today's era of brash personalities. He helped opponents off the canvas after knocking them down. He refused to spy on future opponents' training. He believed in earning victory. Honestly. After the lights faded, Patterson didn't chase headlines or bitterness. He served as chairman of the New York State Athletic Commission and ran an amateur boxing club for young fighters. And in 1991, he entered the International Boxing Hall of Fame, finally recognized for what he'd truly been all along. So how should we remember Floyd Patterson? Not for the 7 knockdowns by Johansson, not for the first-round beatdowns by Liston, but for the man who stood up when it mattered most, who broke boxing's color barriers, stood with civil rights icons despite mortal danger, and treated every opponent, friend or foe, with respect. He was never the loudest, never the flashiest. But maybe he was the most human champion we ever had. Because in the end, Floyd Patterson didn't just fight for titles. He fought for dignity. He fought for others. And he fought to be remembered as more than just a man who lost big. And now? It's our job to make sure history remembers him for the right reasons. Patterson was more than his defeats. He was the first man to ever reclaim the heavyweight crown. The quiet warrior who faced down humiliation and still got back up. The champion who showed the world that true toughness isn't loud, it's resilient. So now that you know the real story, how should you remember Floyd Patterson? Was he boxing's forgotten pioneer, a misunderstood great, or simply a great man caught in the wrong era? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you're into stories that dig deeper than knockouts and headlines, hit that like button and subscribe. We've got more coming. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.